Thanks, Sal. Thanks, Anna, for inviting me to speak. Women have a right to speak, after all. As most of you here are aware, on the final day of sitting, the Queensland Minister for Women, late last year, Shannon Fentiman, introduced the Births, Deaths and Marriages Registration Bill 2022 into the Queensland Parliament. Women and our allies do not support the erasure of females as a sex class, and so we absolutely do not support Minister Fentiman's proposed legislation, which will allow any man to change his birth certificate to say female. Many of us have expressed very valid concerns in our submissions to the Legal Affairs and Safety Committee, to which the bill was referred. A few of us here were also invited to make oral submissions. Sadly, but unsurprisingly, last Friday, the committee gave a recommendation to pass the bill. Our concerns have been ignored and dismissed. I'll share some of my submission with you today, but I first want to make mention of the despicable way that women's lived experiences, our reality, our biology, and acknowledgement of all these things that are merely based in fact and objective truth have been hijacked and reframed as hateful and bigoted. And a reminder that it isn't hate to speak the truth, and it isn't hate to defend your rights. Firstly, like most of you here, I don't believe anyone should be permitted to alter their birth certificate in any way. It is a record that documents the birth of a person, the details of a moment in time, an historical document, and any alterations legally falsify it, creating a legal fiction. Humans are sexually dimorphic. We are all born either male or female. That is simple biology and fact. Ask the biologist over there. Meantime, non-binary is an anti-scientific identity. It is not a third sex. Humans can't change sex. It's immutable and present in our DNA in every single cell of our body. So why should some individuals be allowed to change the sex marker on their birth certificate to reflect some intangible ideological gender identity? It prioritises subjective feelings above reality. Secondly, in introducing this bill to Parliament, the Minister for Women said, "We have carefully considered the experiences of LGBTIQ+ stakeholders, the difficulties they face and the recommendations they made in order to get these reforms right. Quite simply, we listened and this bill is the result." In other words, Minister Fentiman openly admits that she only considered the needs of this group and ignored the valid concerns of women who make up 50% of her constituency. Another way we know this to be true is by the Honourable Shannon Fentiman's actions in blocking women like me from her official MP Facebook account. The Minister even blocked some of us, like Sal Grover, from her Attorney General email account. Doesn't sound like the behaviour of an elected representative in a democratic society. It certainly doesn't sound very honourable. It sounds more like the behaviour of a minister in a dictatorship or autocratic regime. Doesn't the Minister for Women have a ministerial responsibility to hear and listen to women? On introducing this bill, the Minister also stated the changes will not significantly impact people who are opposed to them, namely women. Many women and our allies strongly disagree. For instance, I have a particular interest in sport. We all know it's so good for girls and women to play sport. There's the obvious health benefits. It also builds self-esteem and self-worth along with social skills. There's a study linking career success with sport participation, showing 94% of female CEOs and executives play sport. The whole purpose of the female sport category was to give women and girls a fair and level playing field so they could excel and compete against other females. Female bodies are different to male bodies, as we all know. There's around 6,500 differences, in fact. But if any male can legally change his birth certificate to say female, then the female sport category ceases to exist. This will significantly impact the lives of hundreds and thousands of Queensland girls and women who participate in sport from the amateur right through to the elite levels. One factor which affects female athletes and not their male counterparts is menstruation, which only occurs in females. As the Aussie weightlifting champ Deborah Lovely Ackerson pointed out at the public information session held late last year here in Brisbane, female athletes must adjust their training when they have their period. That's because due to different hormones in our bodies at that time, we're more prone to injury, not as strong, can't train as hard, etc. as a result. So if you look at the 4-year lead up to each Olympic Games, as an example, female athletes lose an entire year of training due to having their period. Meantime, Shannon Fentiman, along with every Queensland MP, was invited to that info session to hear from concerned women. Not one MP bothered to come to hear women speak or to speak with women. The fact is, if any man or boy can change his birth certificate to say he's female, then women and girls lose their right to fair and meaningful sporting competition. Women and girls also lose their right to single-sex changing facilities and accommodations. So one group is being given a right to change the sex on their birth certificate, and this results in a loss of a multitude of rights for women and girls. All of these issues, as the women before me have said, have been pointed out to Minister Fentiman. We've highlighted this collision of rights, but our voices have been ignored. The Minister is either willfully ignorant, plain foolish, or utterly corrupt if she thinks that predatory males aren't already taking advantage of self-ID here and overseas. In introducing this bill, she had the audacity to say some groups will try to cloak their transphobia in the guise of women's safety, making claims about trans women accessing women's spaces, including change rooms or even domestic violence shelters. I want to be clear, there is no evidence domestically or internationally to support these outrageous claims. Hey, Shannon! There's plenty of evidence of exactly this, and it's only growing because this sort of legislation emboldens male predators, which is what we are concerned about. Whether these males identify as trans women or not is totally irrelevant. How can women tell the difference between a man and a trans woman? The answer is we can't. How can women tell the difference between a trans woman and a male predator? The answer is we can't. How can women tell the difference between a trans woman and an autogynephile or AGP? That is, a man who gets sexual arousal from wearing women's clothing, who gets off thinking of himself as a woman and being treated like a woman, who gets off on things like menstruation, breastfeeding and other female bodily functions. The answer is we can't. These spaces are female only for a reason. These spaces are not meant for males, regardless of their gender identity. The Queensland Government is pushing a lie, the lie that men can be women, that males can be females. This is destroying women and girls' safe spaces and giving predatory males a welcome invitation to enter these spaces. Women and girls will self-exclude from things like sport, public swimming pools, bathrooms, and will not be freely able to participate in daily life as a result. This is in direct contravention of CEDAW, the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, an international treaty to which Australia is a signatory. How very progressive. In fact, the Yogyakarta Principles, which are referred to in the explanatory notes for Minister Fentiman's bill, have exactly zero force in Australian or international law. They have also never been ratified by the UN. On the same day that Shannon Fentiman introduced this bill, she talked about how important it is to get women into leadership positions and mentioned the fact that the Queensland State Government is made up of 21 fantastic women representing their communities, with Australia's longest serving female Premier. Would Minister Fentiman think it okay if those 21 fantastic women were in fact trans-identified males? Would that be a step closer to the gender equality she's seeking? Meantime, the Minister for Women waxes lyrical about all the things the state government's doing for women. For instance, in the 2021-2022 budget, it delivered more than $138 million to respond to domestic, family and sexual violence. While the vision for the government's Queensland's women's strategy is women and girls have equal rights and equal access to opportunities. Women and girls are safe, valued and able to freely participate and succeed in the economic, social and cultural opportunities available. Women and girls are recognised and celebrated for their achievements and contributions to the community. And to develop this women's strategy, public consultations from the community identified two major themes to be addressed as a priority. 1, men's violence against women and girls. 2, women's economic security and financial independence. But this women's strategy, in Fentiman's own words, recognises all people who identify as women.
What a joke.
What this means is anyone is a woman if they say they are. How fucking preposterous! How utterly insulting! A woman is an adult human female. We are not an identity. We are not a costume or an idea in some biologist's head. We are not a feeling or a fetish or an experience. We are so much more than all of these things. But at the core of it, we are women simply because we are female. That is it. That's the only criteria. When some of her female constituents managed to get a meeting with Shannon Fentiman recently, and again raised concerns about predatory males accessing female-only spaces, the Minister for Women was not only condescending, but the self-identified feminist totally disregarded the link these women rightly made between Queensland's self-ID plans and Scotland's. Apparently, Queensland's version has risk management and risk assessments in place. Phew! And don't worry, the Minister said if you encounter a predatory male, trans-identified or otherwise, in a woman's space, just ring the police. I assume that's after you've been potentially traumatised, flashed, groped, molested or worse. Nothing at all to worry about. I regularly take my young daughter to swimming lessons at the local pool. In the female change rooms, I witness other mothers caring for young children, semi-nude, breastfeeding, showering. I witness elderly women changing after a nice swim. Some require walking aids. All these women and children are vulnerable and are in a state of semi-undress. Predatory males must not be invited into these spaces. If men who adopt a trans identity are given the green light, then all men are invited in, because how do we know the difference? Not to mention, Minister Fentiman made her move at a time when caution is being urged around the world in relation to the medicalisation, mutilation and ultimately sterilisation of young people with experimental drugs and life-altering surgeries. But timing is apparently unimportant. Astonishingly, the Minister chose to introduce her bill just 1 week after the UN expert on violence against women wrote a letter in response to the Scottish Government's proposals to reform gender recognition laws. In that letter, Reem Al-Salem said that Scotland's version of self-ID would potentially open the door for violent males who identify as men to abuse the process. How outrageous and utterly arrogant that the Minister for Women would not only ignore concerned Queensland women, but would also completely disregard a UN expert on this matter. Anyone with any ounce of common sense needs only consider the high number of women who have been personally impacted by some form of male violence, and it absolutely beggars belief that there's any confusion about the need for single-sex spaces. These spaces are necessary for these many girls and women, these survivors, these warriors, to feel safe and to be able to heal without being re-traumatised by the presence of males. A transgender woman is a male. He is a man. Women must have access to spaces free of all males for privacy, safety and dignity. Some of our most vulnerable women, incarcerated women, are being forced to be housed with violent male sex offenders, rapists and murderers. It's nothing short of torture and extraordinary cruelty. On that point, Mr. Greg Burke from the Department of Justice and Attorney General's Office spoke at the committee hearings this year. He stated, and I quote, that Scotland did an extensive piece of work, including considering a range of literature, and did not find any evidence supporting a link between women-only spaces inclusive of transgender women and cisgender men falsely claiming a trans identity to access these spaces. Surely, given the shit show we've witnessed recently in Scotland with rapists like Adam Graham and convicted pedophile Katie Dalatowski, this Greg Burke, staff of Minister Fentiman, must eat his words. Surely he must resign, as must Minister Fentiman. I'll just mention that this same Queensland Government bureaucrat also refers to things like the male-female binary cisgender framework. Insane. How will Shannon Fentiman guarantee the safety, privacy, dignity and human rights of girls and women in Queensland? How will the Minister ensure women and girls will not be put in danger under her massively flawed legislation? What assurances can she possibly provide that we will not be harmed physically, emotionally, psychologically by self-ID when there's so much proof this is exactly what is happening? If nothing else, my submission and 180 others are on the public record. Our opposition to this insane legislation is on the public record, so they can never say that they didn't know. And now, as mentioned, the committee last week recommended the bill be passed. It's a really sad state of affairs, considering that in their statement of reservation, 2 committee members said the submissions from IWD Meanjin and Women's Forum Australia also took issue with the lack of consultation There should be no limits on who the minister and policy staff will talk to based on their own agenda. The government has an obligation to listen. To have ministers refuse to do this is unacceptable. Another committee member, Sandy Bolton from Noosa, also mentioned the timing of the bill over the Christmas period and the unnecessary and unreasonable timeframes imposed on this inquiry. Sandy summed up her statement with the following. The development of this bill could have benefited immeasurably by being conducted in a transparent, respectful and consultative manner with the whole community over an extended period of time. Instead, we have seen a bill that has created needless angst and anger, with professionals requesting to be anonymous for fear of being labelled transphobic. This is not the type of Queensland or society we aspire to. So to all of you here, we are grassroots, and despite the fatigue, we must keep up the fight. We need to keep the public pressure on. If you're Queensland-based, please keep writing to your MPs, ask to meet with them. We especially need to ensure LNP MPs understand the issues with this legislation, explain why it must be opposed. If you haven't already, please sign and share the Women's Forum Australia petition. Last I checked, it was nearly at 10,000. Keep showing up to events like this one, please. Come next weekend if you can, when Kelly J. Keane will be in town as part of her Let Her Speak tour. Connect with women, support one another in any way you can, and with the men here, thank you so much for coming. Volunteer with one of the organisations represented here, start that podcast, write to the newspaper, contact a journalist with a story idea, continue to reject this ideology, resist, revolt, raise our voices in any way we can. It isn't hate to speak the truth, it isn't hate to defend your rights and the rights of your daughters.